It's another sad day for Rick and Morty fans. After waiting 2 long years for the show's return, Season 3 is already over, and just as Rick warned in the premiere, it was the darkest season of the show so far. Morty lost his childhood heroes, Evil Morty made a glorious return, Beth was revealed to be a tiny sociopath, Jerry wallowed in his Jerryness, Summer had body image issues, and oh yeah, Rick turned himself into a pickle to get out of therapy. It was certainly an eventful season that delivered more of the zany existential laughs that we come to expect from this show, and it unquestionably gave us some of the best episodes of the series. But while Season 3 has been met with almost universal praise, I can't help but feel like as a whole, this season was the weakest of the 3 so far, at least in my opinion.
Boo! Boo! Morty sucks!
Whatever your name is!
Now that's not to say that it was bad, far from it. Even at its worst, Rick and Morty is still the best, so that's not saying much. But if you're anything like me, you might have been left feeling like something was just a bit off this season, like it wasn't quite the same show it once was. And after some pondering, I think I've figured out why. But before I go into some of my issues with this season, it's only fair that I first go over what I think it did right, which is quite a lot. I actually liked the majority of what this season had to offer. For the most part, it maintains the same standards of quality of the previous seasons, and was even an improvement in some areas, especially with regards to character development. Summer and Morty in particular have grown and changed quite a lot, especially Morty, who isn't really fazed by anything anymore and even shows some maturity and expertise in some situations. Clearly he is learning a lot from spending so much time with Rick. He's no longer the dumb naive kid with a learning disability, which gives the show more dramatic weight. The season also explores new avenues of Rick's personality, elevating him to godlike status at the beginning only to take him down by the end. The hard edge of this season comes from the fact that Rick removes Jerry and becomes, as he calls it, the de facto patriarch of the family. His superintelligence is shown to be an excuse for him to be an awful person, and that has a toxic effect on the family. But by the end, Rick is put in his place, and even though he claims otherwise, he has to sit and take it because, despite what he'd like his family to believe, he can't leave them because he's committed to them even though he knows there's no reason to be. This goes to show that even Rick, who constantly talks about the meaninglessness of love and relationships, desires those things as much as anyone else. Beth is also explored more, which was a welcomed addition because her character has always been the most shallow of the core family members. The penultimate episode of the season gives us a little more insight into her childhood growing up with Rick as a father, and what's revealed is quite surprising and hilariously disturbing.
Alright, that's it. I'm out of here.
We also got to see Rick and Jerry spend some time together, and their pairing made for one of my favorite episodes of the season. In fact, there were a lot of good episodes this year. The premiere was fantastic from top to bottom, a great blend of jokes, action, and character moments that changed everything and nothing. And even though some didn't seem to like it, I thought The Vindicators was a lot of fun. I enjoyed how it literally ripped apart the concept of superheroes and showed how flawed such characters would be while highlighting how much better Rick is in comparison. And Rick getting blackout drunk, casually killing the Thanos-esque big bad off screen and becoming the villain a la Saw is a hilarious concept. There's also this joke.
I conceived a child with 1,000,000 ants and it died inside me because it was 500,000 ants and half collapsing star!
That is so dumb and tragic, I love it. I also liked Morty's Mind Blowers, which was a nice replacement for interdimensional cable, though I can't say I didn't miss that. And of course, there's the masterpiece of the season, episode 7, the Rick Landis mix-up, which trolls the audience with a creative and darkly funny premise that holds a mirror up to our society in a surprisingly powerful way, culminating in the return of Evil Morty, who hasn't made an appearance since season 1. Like Morty's existential crisis and Rick's attempted suicide, this moment is one of those quintessential dramatic moments that appear out of nowhere and linger with you long after the episode is over. It is simply one of the best episodes in the history of the show. So yeah, there was a lot to love about season 3. However, despite the improvements in some areas, I think the problem for me is that while every season of Rick and Morty has had its highs and lows, I feel like season 3 had the highest highs and the lowest lows, making for a more disjointed and inconsistent collection of episodes than prior seasons, especially in the first half. And I think the reason for this is because the writing for this season was different in some minor but significant ways, mainly in the way the show balances the humor with the character drama. To put it simply, it's not quite as subtle as it once was. While the angst and familial drama between the Smiths has always been present, prior seasons usually presented it as a side dish to the wacky and hilarious sci-fi shenanigans, complementing the humor like sprinkles on an already delicious bowl of ice cream, only focusing on it when you least expect it for maximum dramatic effect. But most of the episodes this season weren't written quite the same way, and consequently it felt like Rick and Morty was starting to focus a little too much on drama and psychological examination at the expense of the humor, which more than anything else is the main reason people watch this show. The balance felt just a bit off, though thankfully it got back into the groove of things as the season went on. This is why I think the second half is much stronger than the first. Episodes 2 and 3 in particular felt kind of lackluster and didn't inspire the same quality of laughs from me that the average episode of Rick and Morty usually does, especially coming off of the exquisite premiere. It's not that these two episodes don't have solid premises to them, but more that the writing doesn't merge the comedy and drama quite as deftly as the show usually does. Rickmancing the Stone sees Rick, Morty, and Summer adventure to a Mad Max parody world, which the kids use as an excuse to run away from coming to terms with the splitting apart of their family. This is a good idea for an episode, but the execution is a little too ham-handed. Instead of focusing on the comedy of the adventure as a thematic extension of Morty and Summer's emotional turmoil, their turmoil is the focus. For instance, Morty obtains an awesome giant arm, which he uses to beat his opponents to death as a means of coping with his father leaving. But instead of leaving it at that for the audience to interpret, the writing makes this fact extremely obvious by having Morty state this in a matter-of-fact way that leaves nothing to interpret.
Stop standing in the driveway talking about custody, and either tell her you want to stay married or get on with your life, but whatever you do, stop being a baby and act like a man!
This is damaging to the storytelling, and more importantly, the comedy. It's just not as funny as it could be. But Pickle Rick has to be the most extreme example of this issue, which is why it's my least favorite episode of the season, maybe of the entire series. Aside from my opinion that the episode relies far too heavily on over-the-top violence for laughs, something that had already been done better in a previous episode by the way, my problem with this episode can be encapsulated in a moment that's near universally praised: Dr. Wong's psychoanalyzation of Rick. While certainly well written, it goes on for far too long, and again lacks the subtlety that Rick and Morty used to have. Dr. Wong basically lays bare Rick's pathology for the audience. This should have been self-evident with the extreme actions Rick takes in the episode. It didn't need explaining and should have been left for the audience to figure out themselves, but for some reason the writers felt the need to have another character state it out loud. At least it makes sense for this particular character to do so, but it still feels needless and clunky, and worst of all, not that funny. I know it's strange to hear me constantly describe Rick and Morty as subtle, so to better understand what I mean, let's take a look at a couple older episodes for comparison, starting with a classic, Meeseeks and Destroy from season 1. Like the best of Rick and Morty, this episode is not only really funny and clever, but has a greater theme to it, which is set up early on in one simple statement by Rick.
The universe is a crazy, chaotic place!
You're the one that's crazy and chaotic!
The episode then explores this theme both in Morty's adventure, which takes Rick and Morty to unexpected places and culminates in Morty almost being raped by a child-molesting jelly bean, and the Meeseeks, who quickly spiral out of control when they can't help Jerry take 2 swings off his golf game. Now, if this episode were written like Pickle Rick, it would have ended with Rick or Morty delivering a speech about the chaotic nature of the universe and how you never know what to expect. But it never does, because this theme is self-evident within the subtext of the episode. It's not meant to be in the forefront. It's meant to be a dark thematic backdrop to the humor. You're not supposed to notice it because you're too busy laughing, and it's only if you take the time to think about it some more afterwards that you appreciate the layers. That's the hallmark of good comedic storytelling. Rick's Minutes is another good example of the elegant writing and storytelling of early Rick and Morty. Despite half the episode being nothing but silly improv, the heart of it is the Smith family confronting the reality that there are infinite realities where they live the life they wish they always had, coming to terms with that fact and enjoying the simple pleasures in the life they do have, like watching TV with your family, for instance. It's a wonderfully nuanced message that never gets in the way of the story or the laughs. The closest the episode gets to outright explaining it is Morty's talk with Summer, which is succinct, poignant, and provides one of the series' most memorable lines.
Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's gonna die. Come watch TV.
Another favorite of mine is the slightly underrated Morty Night Run, which is about Morty realizing that the universe is too big to care about who lives and who dies, which Morty learns the hard way after his misguided but well-intentioned attempt to save a mind-reading fart leads to more innocent deaths than had him and Rick just spent the day playing video games. With tears in his eyes, Morty ends up having to kill Fart himself when he realizes he is a threat to all life. While one of the funniest episodes of the show, it also happens to contain a grim and pragmatic lesson that's never over-explained and emotionally complements the humor without drawing attention away from it. This is what Rick and Morty does when it fires on all cylinders. It stares into the abyss and makes a fart joke out of it.
There's a lot more where that came from, too.
But I think the best example of this is episode 4 of season 2, Total Recall, which is my all-time favorite episode precisely because it beautifully balances humor and character in a way that isn't immediately obvious the first time you watch it. It ingeniously blends the premise of The Thing with Total Recall, and then uses that to parody the clip show format, a common trope of sitcoms, and then uses that as an excuse to come up with as many dumb, wacky, and bizarre characters as possible. And then on top of that, the episode uses the concept of memories to explore the dark side of familial relationships in a way that's actually kind of endearing. It is only when the Smiths realize that they have bad memories of each other that they know they are real. It's quite touching in a dark, twisted sort of way without being the slightest bit sentimental. This subtext is hidden under layers of sharp, finely crafted juvenile humor, and that is what makes it brilliant. This is why Rick and Morty is held to such high standards. It so often has done this with seemingly little effort that feels organic and not the least bit forced. Season 3, on the other hand, isn't quite as graceful in this regard. The nihilism that lies at the heart of the show is now more obvious than ever. Characters explicitly talk and give speeches about how nothing matters, which has always been a philosophical part of the show, that's true, but it used to be background noise amidst all the silly fun to be had. It used to be subtext, now it's text, which takes a bit of the fun out of it. But perhaps I'm not being fair. After all, it's only natural that the characters start to wise up to these things the longer they adventure across the multiverse, and it's realistic that they talk about it. If we want the characters to feel real, they can't remain stagnant. They have to grow, but at the same time remain the same because that is how sitcoms work, which is why season 3 ends with Beth and Jerry back together, effectively returning the show to status quo. Maybe I'm just nitpicking. Maybe I'm doing the very thing Mr. Poopy Butthole warns us about at the end of season 3, and I'm wasting too much time thinking about a show featuring a character named Mr. Poopy Butthole. But Rick and Morty deserves to be thought about, even if its authors like to poke fun at their fans' particular brand of obsession. Underneath all the absurdist, immature, and often nonsensical comedy is a sophisticated and intelligently crafted show that has some really thoughtful and interesting things to say about family and relationships in a crazy and chaotic cosmos where objectively none of that matters. And that's what I've always loved about it. That's what initially drew me to it back in season 1. Maybe I just long for the days of that season, which I still hold in high esteem. There's a simplicity and purity to that first season. It didn't have a rabid fanbase to appeal to or the self-awareness of later seasons. It's pure Rick and Morty goodness, just Rick and Morty going on crazy adventures, and that's why it's still my favorite, despite the amount of stellar episodes that have come out since. The truth is that I just have to come to terms with the fact that, like every television show, Rick and Morty has and will continue to change and evolve as the series goes on, which is a natural part of the creative process and cannot be stopped. It has to take risks. It can't just have Rick and Morty and sometimes Summer go on yet another sci-fi adventure while the rest of the family deals with their issues in a lower stakes B-side plot. If there's one constant truth in the universe, it's that nothing stays the same forever. Season 3 took some creative risks, and for all of my relatively minor issues I've outlined here, I'd say it was mostly a success, and I'm really looking forward to season 4, whenever it comes out.